right-hand side. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts that pop up while we're going through, please feel free to type those in there. We will also spend time at the end if there are any questions, things need elaboration, etc. Know that that will also be a time available for us as well. So, in the event that for some reason we run up right onto the hour, the 11 o'clock hour, and you've got a jet to get to the next thing, please feel free to leave. I trust you know how to manage your own time at this point in your careers and jobs. So yeah, we will go ahead and get started. Very first thing, I want you to think about what are the most important relationships in your life. Think about the top 5 relationships. You can write these down, you can think about them, you could type them on a list on your phone. You don't need to share them. You don't need to share them or type them in the chat box, but just spend probably about the next 30 seconds thinking about what are the most important relationships in your life. What relationships have the most impact, are the most meaningful? Think about those for a couple seconds. Now, when I do this one in person, when I do this presentation in person, usually I ask folks to, we sort of will like make a list at some point. Most folks will put down, and when it comes to important relationships in their life, significant other, best friends, family members. Some people will put their pets, which I absolutely would put my dog. But I think the key part is that there is almost no one who ever puts down the relationship with themselves as one of the top 5. Now, I know you're probably like, okay, that is really cheesy and corny. But I think it's really important for us to think about as we spend our time today talking about self-compassion, as we talk about what does it look like to engage in the act of self-compassion. We have to talk about the relationship we have with ourselves. We're going to talk a little bit about Kristen Neff's work. She's a psychologist who specializes in positive psychology, and she says, treat yourself as you would treat a good friend. And I don't know about y'all, but there are days that I treat my friends really, really well. And I will treat my own personal self like garbage. So I think this image is kind of, this quote is a wake-up call that, you know, at some point we have not treated ourselves like we would treat the people around us. Now, going back, like, okay, I said pick 5 relationships. Even if I said, like, just list all the important relationships in your life, there still might be folks who don't put down the relationship you have with yourself. But I really, truly believe that the relationship with yourself is incredibly important because it impacts, obviously, yourself, but really, truly impacts the way you treat other people. So we're going to spend some time today talking about self-compassion. We're going to spend some time talking about the framework of positive psychology. The name can be a little misleading because I think when we hear the term positive, we think like, well, we have to be chipper and happy and jubilant all the time, and that is not true. We're going to talk about some strengths-based approach and gratitude approaches, and then we're going to talk about how we implement those into our daily well-being. So when it comes to relationships, a relationship is really just any sort of communication with, I mean, like I said, it doesn't even have to be communication. It's just the dynamic between any 2 people. Certainly, y'all have a relationship with me. It's a little bit different than the relationship I have with you because it's a little bit more one way. You know everything. You know things about your own life, and you hear me talking. But I know about my life, but I don't know about any of your lives. So that is a relationship right there. It doesn't mean that a relationship has to be a romantic relationship, a best friend relationship. A relationship is just any dynamic between two entities. Um, and so we spend a lot of our time growing up learning how to communicate with our friends, certainly learning how to communicate with family members or people who raised us or people we lived with. As we enter the workforce, we learn how to engage with our colleagues, our bosses, people who work for us. Maybe if we're in a teaching position, we learn how to work with students. If we're in another staff position on campus, we learn how to maybe interact with parents or people on the phone, or interact with people outside the university as well. So we spend a lot of time learning how to communicate with others, but we don't always spend time learning how to talk to ourselves. And again, I want to acknowledge how cheesy and corny that sounds. 20 years ago, if you'd asked me, how do you talk to yourself? What does the relationship with yourself look like? I would have laughed. I would have said something really witty. And I would have moved on from it. But I think it's so important to evaluate the relationship that we have with ourselves and the way that we treat ourselves. And a major question that I think we need to be asking ourselves throughout this whole talk is, why do we speak differently to ourselves than we would someone else? For example, why do I talk to my dog as if she is the most important creature on the planet, but maybe I don't even do an ounce of the same for myself? Or as a therapist, there are a lot of things that I share with clients and talk to clients about, but sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, do I not take my own advice, or do I not incorporate the things that I talk about? There's a huge disconnect between the way we talk to ourselves and the way we talk to others. So self-compassion involves acting the same way towards yourself, when you are having a difficult time, when you fail, when you notice something about yourself you don't like. Self-compassion is, or just compassion in general, is warmth, caring, desire to help someone suffering in some way. When it comes to self-compassion, that someone is ourselves, okay? In self-compassion, there is understanding and kindness rather than judgment. We certainly maybe have some air of judgment when it comes to other people, but we are more likely to practice understanding and kindness with others, and then it's going to be flipped around for us. We're more likely to judge ourselves, or we're more less likely to engage in understanding and kindness towards ourselves. So think about a grade. If I got a grade on an exam, and let's say it's 100 points, 1 point for one question, so 100 questions, and I got an A minus. And an A minus, correct me if I'm wrong, is like a 90 to a 92, I believe. So let's just say, for the sake of the argument, I got 90 questions right. But for the most part, when we see we got an A minus, we're like, oh my gosh, I missed 10 questions, or I didn't get an A, or I didn't get an A plus. We focus on missing those 10 as opposed to like, holy cow, there were 90 instances of me getting a question right. But we don't focus on that. It could be the question, or the exam was 200 questions, which now I have to do math. So then that would be 180 questions we got right, and 20 we got wrong. But we still put so much more weight on the things that we got wrong than on the things we get right. Self-compassion is about caring for ourselves, being kind to ourselves, but it's not about narcissism. There are certainly people in the world, not to get political, there are people in the world who have the greatest self-compassion that could possibly exist, but it's not in a healthy way. There has to be a balance. It's not about narcissism. It's not about accepting that absolutely nothing is wrong. It's not about letting yourself off the hook, okay? Self-compassion does not take away pain, We practice it because we really truly are suffering, or because we are hurting, or because we experience something that we feel like is harmful or hurts us in some way. We practice it because we are human. Okay. So self compassion is almost kind of like we're going to shift the fulcrum of that scale. I can't believe I just said fulcrum. Like, I don't think I've used that word in 20 years, but um, so instead of the scale being even, we typically have the things that go wrong have a lot more weight, and we put more emphasis on that. But we're going to adjust the scale to make it more even. Generally, the reason why we're talking about this is that people who have self compassion are happier, they're more optimistic, and they're less likely to be depressed or anxious. Now, that doesn't mean that suddenly you have like one positive thought that suddenly you're cured and will never feel any of these again. But it's about being. There's a reason why I used practicing self-compassion, a well-being framework, is that we need to look at our total holistic wellness. And self-compassion is going to impact that and help us have more well-being, help us have a more holistic balance to life. Because as humans, we need to feel all of our emotions, and all of them in a healthy way. When we experience happiness or experience joy, and it's only for a second or a couple minutes, but something of the same, an event of the same weight, um, in terms of time, energy put into it, gets more emotional energy from us, that's really going to impact our well-being. So there are 3 elements of self-compassion, and we're going to go through all of them. Again, this is by Dr. Neff, who is a psychologist who practices a lot of positive psychology, talks a lot about self-compassion. There are 3 elements of self-compassion: self-kindness versus self-judgment, common humanity versus isolation, and mindfulness versus over identification. And so when it comes to self-kindness versus self-judgment, what do we do when we fail, when we feel inadequate, we experience suffering, we notice mistakes? We generally are really hard on ourselves. I don't know about you, but like, I'm pretty critical of myself at times. But I don't know if anyone notices this. We are all imperfect. I don't even know what the definition of perfection would look like when it comes to a human. But we all make mistakes at some point. Life is also very difficult. So if we know that ahead of time, then why are we critical of ourselves? Why are we hard on ourselves when we know that we're going to make mistakes? It's like punishing ourselves for breathing. Like, well, I know I'm going to breathe every single day because I need that to live. And I know that if I'm not focusing on my breathing, my body's going to take over and do that automatically. But it would be like getting mad at myself for breathing when it's built into my body and my functioning, and it's what I need to survive. In the same way, not that we need imperfection and difficult situations in life to survive, but we know they're going to happen. We know they're going to occur. So why do we punish ourselves or are harsh on ourselves? We need to remove judgment from the equation, because the power of judgment can be such a burden upon us. So that's where we get self-kindness versus self-judgment. Is there a difference between the two? Yes. Are we practicing self-kindness over self-judgment? Self-kindness is going to be, okay, I made a mistake. What can I learn from it? How can I grow? What can I do differently? What circumstances can I change? What circumstances couldn't I change that I weren't even within my control? We don't want to blame ourselves for things that are so silly and out of our control, but we like internalize and blame anyway. So self-kindness, we're avoiding that self-judgment. Common humanity versus isolation. Again, plot twist. All people suffer. All people experience loss. All people experience setbacks. All people experience failure. We know that. But do we like really truly know that? Do we, like, in the depths of our hearts know that is true? Yes. But we apply it to everyone except ourselves. We have a very different view of ourselves than we do of other people, and the same for every other person on the planet, probably. So it's like everyone on the planet thinks that we are the exception and not the rule, but we think everyone else is the rule and not the exception, which is literally the most, like, almost mutually exclusive thing out there. All people suffer, all people experience loss, all people experience setbacks, and all people experience failure. We all share that. We are all mortal. Plot twist. That's also a very, very hard thing to reconcile sometimes. We are all vulnerable, imperfect people. Yet, why do we strive for perfection when we know it's not possible? Why do we ask more of ourselves than we ask of others? Why do we push ourselves thinking that we are the exception and not part of the rule? So we need to focus on that. Hey, we are mortal and we are imperfect because it's true. And we don't need to deny, again, the hardships of life, but we also need to truly recognize that we're all people and we are all imperfect. We all share that. We're not special in the sense of it comes to, like, we're excluded from the rules that life is hard, and people get a pass. We need to not exclude ourselves from that. Okay. What we experience is what others experience. What others experience is what we experience. And we are never alone. We never need to be alone. We all share this as people. We might have very different experiences based on our identities, our roles, our positions in life. I don't want to deny that, and I don't want to ignore that. But when it comes to us being critical of ourselves, we really have to recognize that we are not we're not alone in that. We all do it to some extent, but we also need to recognize that the rules apply to everybody of self-criticism and being imperfect. Mindfulness versus over-identification. Again, self-compassion is not about ignoring the issues. If I go rob a bank and then later feel guilty about it, I shouldn't be like, hey, you know what, Mark? Like, you should forgive yourself for that because it's totally fine, not a big deal. Okay, we don't want to ignore the issues, but we want balance. We want equilibrium. Why do the negatives outweigh the positives in life? If I get 1,000 emails a day and I forget to respond to one of them, why do I take that one tiny moment and magnify it and amplify it to a very disproportionate degree? And why do the negatives always outweigh the positives? Again, going back to getting that A- on the test, why does getting the 10 incorrect have much more of an impact than getting the 90 correct? We think about it as like we start at 100 and we subtract, when really we need to think about it as we start at 0 and we're building up. So mindfulness versus over-identification is being very aware of the balance, being very aware of what does that equation look like? Why do we judge our own faults and discount the positives? Why do we disproportionately rank things in life or situations differently than we would for other people or in other situations? Part of this means that we need to focus on the facts, the truth, the whole picture, instead of being caught up in one failure in a sea of success. Again, we want to be aware of what's going on and really, truly, it almost makes me think of, like, oh gosh, like middle school algebra, where we talk about y equals mx plus b, where when we think about this is such a nerd moment. I'm so sorry. When we think about um, like a slope, it tells us how much we have to account for certain variables or account in certain situations. Whether that's, like y equals 2x plus b or y equals 3 million x plus b. When we really magnify and amplify some of the negatives in life or our failures, um, when there could be 10,000 things that go really well. I think that's like one failure in the sea of success. The sea, the ocean is kind of big. There's a lot there, but we focus on perhaps the one imperfection or the one thing that doesn't go right. So we're going to talk a little bit about positive psychology. The Again, positive psychology, I really want to focus that the name is a little bit misleading. It's not just, hey, be chipper and cheerful all the time. Positive psychology is about some of these concepts we're going to talk about. So for example, when we go see the doctor, what are we typically going to go see a doctor for? When things aren't going well, when we aren't feeling well. Maybe as a kid, or we take our kid, our child, our kids, someone that we're the guardian of, to see the doctor, maybe for like a checkup. But generally, we see the doctor when we're not feeling well. When do we go see a therapist? Well, I don't have any students that come see me because they're doing really, really well. All of the students that I see aren't doing well. What do we typically see on the news? Things that aren't going well. And again, I really want to acknowledge that, yes, there are a lot of things going on in the world, particularly in the United States, that are worthy of being seen. So we don't want to discount that. But in terms of the news, we generally see things that aren't going well. When there are like positive things on the news, we think of those as fluff pieces, or we don't pay attention to them because they're too they almost seem like they're forced in a way. We have plenty of circumstances when the bad must be treated, but are we really celebrating the good at all? And that is a key component of positive psychology, is we don't want to always focus on the bad. We need to celebrate the success. We need to celebrate the good. We need to focus on the positives that are happening. And we're going to do that in a couple of ways. But first of all, we have to recognize positive psychology is not about always being happy. That is not possible. That's also a common myth that I feel like every student that I see has, like, well, I'm just not happy all the time. Well, plot twist, I'm not either. And that's not realistic. So we don't need to always be happy. That's not going to happen. Happiness is an emotion, and like all emotions, they're not permanent. The same for all emotions: sadness, anger, frustration, they're not permanent. We need to feel all of our feelings to be a well-rounded person. Positive emotions are actually like muscles. We have to really flex them. If we discount happiness, joy, pride, anything that feels good, we're sort of like letting that muscle weaken a little bit. So again, positive psychology is not about always being happy or achieving a state of eternal, infinite happiness. It's not going to happen, okay? Positive psychology is about, we're all doing the best we can, which is sometimes a really jarring phrase for people to hear. We are all doing the best we can. It's true. We are all doing the best we can, given the information available to us, given our circumstances, given our experiences, given the resources. We are all doing the best we can. Is it possible for us to do better? Absolutely. And then once we start doing better, we're doing the best we can then. And it keeps repeating and repeating. So there's this balance of, we're all doing the best we can, and then literally tomorrow, I'll be able to do better, but tomorrow I will also be doing the best that I can. So we need to remind ourselves, we are all doing the best we can, given the circumstances, given our situations, given the things going on in life. We are all doing the best we can. Now, I can tell you that, but how many people had a reaction when I said that, where it's like, ooh, I don't know if that's true, or um, maybe, or there are some circumstances where I don't think that applies. Again, we are all doing the best we can given our circumstances, knowledge, experiences. Positive psychology is about hope and addressing hopelessness. Hope is about the future, right? When we have hope, we are thinking about um, the future in some capacity because we think something will change or something will be different or something's coming down the pipeline or we're looking forward to something. Hopelessness is about the absence of a future, right? Like when I work with students and they talk about they've lost a lot of hope, which I also have to really clarify. I'm like, when you say that, do you mean like the scholarship or hopelessness? Because it could be two very different conversations. But when folks talk about like, I don't feel like I have a lot of hope or I'm feeling pretty hopeless, it's because their vision of the future and their ability to sort of see into the future, not like in witchcraft, but in planning for the future, gets diminished. It gets closer and closer and closer. And they can't necessarily think about the future farther than like a couple hours or a couple days. And that can be really impactful on people. So positive psychology is about hope. Um, and so when we engage in self-compassion, we don't want to diminish our hope at all. We want to cast out feelings of hopelessness and remember that things will change, things can be different. We are doing the best we can. These are all going to tie into self-compassion. Positive psychology, I love this cartoon. So we've got the heart and the brain. The brain is on one side and the heart is on the other, and the heart is like, brain, look, and pointing to just a stack of things that are really, really good. But the brain is focusing on the bad. And what is the brain also doing? Using a magnifying glass to look deeper, to make it appear larger. And the brain saying, not now, can't you see I'm busy? These are all things about positive psychology. We want to balance these out. We want to have hope about all of these things. We want to recognize and celebrate successes. And we're going to talk about some of these. So positive psychology uses a strengths-based approach. Again, this is going to tie directly into self-compassion. I want you to think about your strengths, okay? You can write these down. You can type them on a phone. Just think about your own strengths. Again, you don't have to share them. You're not going to type them into the box. But think about, what are 5 things you're good at? Or maybe, what are 5 traits about yourself that are awesome? Just think about that for a minute, because it can be very difficult for some folks. So just think about, what are 5 things you're good at? What are 5 things, or maybe what are 5 traits about yourself that you really like, or 5 personality traits that are really awesome? Just think about those for a minute. And again, when I typically do this one in person, usually I have folks maybe share about them a little bit, or we sort of process what the experience is like, thinking about your own strengths. And I'm not lying when I say this. A lot of people are like, I can only get 2 or 3, or it was really hard to think of some. Some people absolutely can list 5 things or more. Um, and that's the thing, is that when I say, think about 5 things you're good at, a lot of folks might aim for 5, But if I say, tell me 5 things you're really bad at, so many times folks are like, well, I came up with more than 5, or I came up with 20 things. Again, we focus on our weaknesses and not necessarily all of our strengths, or they're weighted differently. There are so many things we're good at that we don't acknowledge or don't recognize. When we focus on our weaknesses, we're not always focusing on our strengths. We almost focus exclusively on our weaknesses and the things we do wrong, which comes back to self-compassion. This all ties together. We do something wrong, but that doesn't mean that it's the end of the world, or that doesn't mean that's who we are, or that doesn't mean that's going to be it for forever. Again, even if I ask clients, tell me 3 things that are going well. I have so many students who are like, I don't know. It is very difficult because our brains have been wired by our culture and the media and entertainment and other people. And it's very American in a way that we focus on the things that aren't going really well instead of celebrating successes. I this was last year. I had a student who got a B on an exam. I know, a B on an exam. And it was in a very, very hard class. Like, if you knew the class, you'd be like, oh, yep, that's a weed out class. And he just was really perseverating on getting the B. And I was like, but what about like your other grades? What were your other grades like for the semester? And he was like, well, I got all A's on the other one, and I got a 115 on one of my exams. And I'm like, wait, what? You got 115 on an exam, 115%. But the B is something that we're focusing on as the negative, and that's being problematic. And yeah, there is the possibility that we can do better. But remember, we're also always doing our best. And so through further discussion, I was like, what? Do you know the class average on that exam where you got a B? And he was like, I think it was like 45 or something. I was like, you got a B. And the average in the class was a 45. Now, this is just one example of many, many situations that happen. As someone who's been a therapist for 5 years, this is very common in multiple ways, in multiple circumstances. It's that we diminish the things that are really good. We focus on the bad things. Again, we don't want to ignore or discount the negatives, but it's almost like the things that are really going well or the things that are positive are cast aside. They're like they don't even exist. I think a classic example is I can drive to work 1,000 times. Only one of these was a fender bender. How do I frame this information? Well, certainly after the fender bender, I'm going to immediately be like, I'm the worst driver ever. Why did this happen? I'm so stupid. I can't believe I did this. Like, what an idiot. I always get into accidents. No, I don't. I don't always get into accidents because the other 999 times I got to work without a success, or I got to work without an issue. I got to work without problems. So the language that we use really frames the information. I'm a terrible driver. Gosh, I can't do anything right. That's not true. If we convert it to a percentage, it's like negligible, statistically like insignificant. Strengths-based is about incorporating how we frame things and focus on things, and making sure that we're not discounting the positive. We're not solely focusing on the negatives. We want to focus on our strengths. Because what happens if that one fender bender had nothing to do with me? Because maybe it was I got hit from behind and I couldn't swerve out of the way. Or maybe I hit a squirrel, which caused me to crash into something, and that was a fender bender. Why are we not blaming the squirrel? The squirrel's just trying to survive. But we frame things in such a negative capacity that we're not always looking at the things that we are good at. Strengths are important because they are actually our own personal capital to solve problems. They're what we use in problem solving. So we're actually aware of our strengths to some capacity. We just don't necessarily think about them. They're almost like tucked in the back of our mind. Okay. When we use a strengths-based approach, it's how we solve problems because we need to know what we're going to do. It's like, for example, if I'm Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, and I'm like, I need a jar of peanut butter, his ability to problem solve that is going to be very different than my ability to problem solve that. But those are also some of his strengths. He could pay someone to go get it. He could have a drone fly it to him. He could have an entire delivery truck of peanut butter brought to him. Those would be ways that we're problem solving. For me, it's like if I needed a jar of peanut butter, I would just get in the car and go get one. But that's also an indicator of my strength. Like, I have a car. I have the ability to drive. I have the ability to drive myself. I have the ability to drive and not be in accidents, for the most part. I have the money to purchase it. I'm in a spot where I actually can drive to the store, as opposed to like perhaps living in a food desert or living on Mars. Those are some of our strengths, but instead we're going to focus on like, crap, I don't have any peanut butter. You idiot, why didn't you get it last time you were there? Or why didn't you think about it? So a really easy way to identify some of our strengths is to think about a similar situation. All right, so you got a project and you just don't even know how to start. Okay, tell me a time you worked on a similar project, or tell me a time that you had to prepare a presentation. Most people already know the answer. And as a therapist, I swear most people already know the answer. It's almost like I have to be the person at the airport, like on the tarmac with the glowing wands, and be like, hello, like, look over here, please. Or folks are like, gosh, my relationship is really struggling. I like don't know how to communicate. And I'm like, can you tell me a time that you were communicating and it went really well? Okay, what are some of those components that you can incorporate now? Or tell me about the last time you had an argument or a fight or a disagreement. What did you do? And then it's like, we're going to pull those in there. Those are all strengths. Those are all indicators of things that we have done. Our memories are a form of strength. We don't want to just solely focus on the things we're not doing, or we think we aren't capable of doing, or the things that we're struggling with. Because we have solved so many things, and we have so many tools and resources within our own personal toolbox that we sometimes forget about them. A strengths-based approach can also involve, like I talked about, how we frame a situation. Common things might be like, I'm sorry that I'm late, or I'm sorry for causing a problem, or I didn't finish this in time, like that's my bad, or this is a common one, like, oops, I just rambled for 5 minutes about an issue. No, we can change those and focus on the strengths of others as well. Instead of saying, I'm sorry that I was 5 minutes late, thank you for your patience. Thank you for allowing me to be 5 minutes late. Or thank you for understanding that that Beyonce called and I had to take that phone call. Like, I'd be like, okay, yeah, you can be late. Or I appreciate your flexibility. Or I didn't finish this in time, or I was supposed to send this to you an hour ago. Instead, it could be, thank you for waiting. Thank you for understanding. Or, oops, I just rambled for 5 minutes about this topic. You can frame it as like, you're really good at listening, or I really appreciate the fact that you listened, or thank you for giving me the space to do that. It's all about framing things. The ones on the right are focusing on strengths. They're focusing on the strengths of other people. And instead of focusing on our weaknesses, there can still be a balance of like, ooh, I'm sorry I'm late. I woke up 10 minutes late and it impacted my whole morning. Thank you for your patience. There it's still balanced out, but again, we're not solely putting the onus on us, even though we might deserve it. We're still acknowledging the strengths of others. That's a strengths-based approach. Now we're going to talk about a gratitude approach. Again, take a second. I want you to think of 5 things you have gratitude for. You can write them down. You could type them into a note on your phone. You can think about them. You don't need to type them into the chat box. But what are 5 things you have gratitude for? What are things in life that you use that? So think about that for a minute. So in thinking of 5 things we have gratitude for, how many people struggled with it? Again, for the most part, it can be difficult. Gratitude is about what are we thankful for? Um, Again, when it comes to gratitude, we want to focus on having gratitude as opposed to being grateful for something. Because when I think of like being grateful, makes me think of like my grandmother when I was a kid or something, like I'm getting yelled at. Gratitude is about what do we appreciate? What do we value? What are we thankful for? And that can be hard. It's going to sound silly, but like I have a lot of gratitude that like I have a double monitor in my office. Stupid, silly, cheesy, sure, whatever you want. But it also makes doing web work really easy. It helps my brain focus because I can have like 2 things going on at once. That's something I have gratitude for. It also lets me have a presentation on one side and I can watch a chat box on another side. I have gratitude for coffee. I love coffee and I think it is a blessed liquid of hope. I'm so grateful and thankful for it. I have gratitude for the fact that I have a fan next to my desk. I'm from the north. I grew up in Ohio, so I think Georgia is eternally hot. Even when the temperature is 40 degrees, I'm like, it's still too hot. But I have a fan. I'm so grateful that I have that. I have gratitude for it. We can have little tiny things that we have gratitude for. It can also be really big things. I have gratitude that I have a really good relationship with my parents. That's not the case for a lot of people. Some people only have one parent. Some people have no parents. Some people were raised by a family member or a guardian. But I have a lot of gratitude that I have really good relationships with them. And I get to have those relationships with them because my mom does not have good relationships with her parents. They're very, very toxic. And so I can have gratitude for that. I can have gratitude for things that my coworkers do or things that happen in a day. Gratitude is really about being thankful for certain things, not in a shameful way, like, again, like, you should be thankful that you have this. No, no, no. It's like, what do we appreciate about life? What do we appreciate? Because a lot of times we focus on the things we don't have or the things that aren't going well. So when it comes to the intrapersonal gratitude approach, what are we thankful for within ourselves? Or what are we thankful that things that we can do. What are we thankful for from others? That would be our interpersonal gratitude approach. Within me, I can think of like I have a lot of gratitude for um, being for being really sarcastic. I am very sarcastic at times. Yes, I know sarcasm is like the lowest form of wit, but sometimes I'm grateful for it. When it comes to others, I'm thankful that I have really supportive colleagues. I'm grateful that we can have conversations about difficult things because as therapists, we have to be able to grow in certain areas. So we want to be able to identify intrapersonal components of gratitude and interpersonal components of gratitude. Intrapersonal gratitude approach, again, we all know the things we wish we had. Sure, I wish I had a private jet. I wish I was much skinnier. I wish I was smarter. I wish I read that book, or I wish I could do these three things. My brother is very, very athletic and was very athletic in college. I wish I could have been athletic. Like, we know all these things that we wish we had, but do we take time to reflect on what we have now? And we can do these things through, some people have like a gratitude journal, they write them down. Some people take time to really identify things they appreciate. This also means looking at the things that we value in life. What do we value? For me, I really value my friends and my family. So for me, I need to make sure that I remind myself of those and take time to like appreciate those. When it comes to interpersonal, again, we all know the things we wish we had. I wish I had a celebrity best friend because that would just be really cool. Or I wish that my friends would bring me donuts all day long. Like, sure, we want that and we know that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to happen. How do we take time to reflect on what we have now? Those could be, we're writing like, and these are really clear, obvious examples. Writing thank you notes, giving words of affirmation to folks, expressing thankfulness, giving positive feedback to people. Like, hey, I noticed that you did this. I don't think anyone else did, but I want to say thank you for that. Or I really appreciate that you did that. The gratitude approach, again, this is all going to be a part about changing our framework. The way that we frame things really truly matters. For example, this is from the internet. This is not anyone's home, or not anyone's home that I know of. But these are all different frames, and they've all been matted in a very different way. Like the one at the very, very bottom on the left is a very tiny picture, but has a huge frame. And even if we think about the Mona Lisa, depending on the frame that they use, I think at one point they did a study that like this revered painting, if it has a gold frame, more people think the Mona Lisa painting is a picture of a woman smiling. But if they think it's like a darker frame, like mahogany, people think that she's frowning or like looks angry. The way we frame things makes a difference. And it's also the way that we frame things in the world and in our own lives. What do we want to be different? Why do we want that instead of what we currently have? Think about the shiny new toy and where it is now. I remember as a kid, there was always this like new Transformers set that I wanted for my birthday. But the thing is that like every year I wanted the new one, the bright, shiny new one. And the old one would kind of like sit in the back and not get played with. But now where are those? I don't know. They could be in a dumpster somewhere at Goodwill. That's actually a really good question. I have no idea where those are. But the fact is that like at the time I thought they were so great. And now it's like, meh. Granted, I was a kid and like very, very different circumstances, but a lot of times there's this shiny new thing of something we want, and it's not necessarily what we really truly need, because maybe we already have something like it. So, how do we frame the world? How do we frame situations? It can be really easy to be like, ugh, I have to go to work. But certainly during these times, it's maybe I'm thankful for a job, or I'm got a lot of gratitude that I get to go to a job where I get to do things I like. I get to spend time with awesome people. Maybe it's, I hate my brother in law. Well, maybe we frame it as, sure, the brother in law's a jerk, but maybe I'm really thankful for my mother, my sister, my half brother, whatever family looks like. Instead of focusing on that negative relationship or the one we don't like, we're framing it as, I've got these three people that I love and I think are awesome. That's out of the four people, 75% of them are awesome. 100 years ago, when we were building skyscrapers, we couldn't build as high, we couldn't build as sturdy. And I think the same is true when it comes to the framework in our lives is depends on what materials we use. Certainly, we could only build something that was 2 stories high because maybe we were using brick and mud, but now we have concrete, titanium, steel. We can build things. We can build things much higher, much stronger, much sturdier. And that's the same thing with our framework in life is we need to be building a framework that is incorporating our strengths, valuing those, taking time to appreciate what we have, because that is going to impact our whole well-being and thus gives us more self-compassion because it's removing the negative components from life in an unbalanced equation. It doesn't remove them entirely, but it removes them from an unbalanced equation because then if we've got more good things than negative things, the negative things not going to matter as much. And we're not going to focus on those. We want to highlight things that are going well, our strengths, positive components, what we already have. Again, the three elements of self-compassion, self-kindness versus self-judgment, being kind to ourselves and not having this judgy attitude of like, you failed at something, you're an idiot. No, because remember, number 2 is common humanity. We all fail at something. Mindfulness. We're being aware of how it impacts us. Because I can drive to the office 1,000 times. Only one of those was an accident. I'm aware of what that equation looks like. So the what of this framework is, how are you going to go about giving yourself more self-compassion? How are you going to focus on your strengths? How will you focus on and utilize your own strengths and the strengths of others? How will you focus on the haves instead of the have-nots? What are you thankful for? You would be really surprised at how much control you have over your own happiness, your own response to situations, and how you see something. Now, again, granted, there are a lot of things going on in the world, and they've been going on for a very long time, so I don't want to diminish that like, well, you know what, we could all just focus on the positives and be fine. No, that's not it. But we can focus on a framework that incorporates positivity, gratitude, strengths, and rebalance the equation so that we're not so hard on ourselves and allows us to have more healthy well-being. The who, ourselves, are a key part of that. How do we appreciate ourselves? How do we appreciate our own strengths? And then when it comes to others, what do we appreciate about other people, our kids, coworkers, our significant others, partners, spouses, parents, bosses, people who work for us, people who we work for? What are their strengths? The when, it's a daily practice and it takes work. When and how are you going to check in with yourself? A couple times a day, at the morning, at the end? What reminders do you need to make this happen? A great quote from Woody Hayes, who's the former Ohio State football coach. I'm an Ohio State alum. Has a great quote. The quote has been edited to be not in Woody's language, but anything easy ain't worth a darn. And I think that's so true. That if this were easy, then would it really be worth it? It's because it's something that takes a lot of work and it requires a shift in our mind and framework for us to have more well-being, global well-being. But by putting in a little bit every day, we're going to be able to adjust it and change it. The why, well, cynicism, shame, guilt, frustration all take a toll on our lives. Gratitude and daily gratitude practices have been shown to increase cardiovascular functioning. I kid you not. Look up the research of Joel Wong at Indiana University. Gratitude helps your heart. Changing the framework makes us a better leader, a better colleague, a better peer, a better employee, a better supporter of students. It's when we can support the university community because we're doing better, we're going to help others. That's going to help impact retention, progression, graduation. How we present situations to ourselves can change the outcomes. Like, oh, holy crap, I have to do this situation, or I have to do this project, or I have to do this, as opposed to, I get the opportunity to do it. Or I'm thankful I'm in a job where I get to do this because I know I have the ability to do it and the strengths to do it. I just spoke for a whole hour and blitzed through that. Are there any questions, thoughts, reactions, comments, things that folks want to share? You're welcome to unmute yourself or type things in the chat box. And you're also always welcome to send me an email if you need me to. My email address is my first initial and my last name, like most employees at the university, at georgiasouthern.edu. So you can always send me questions if you have follow-ups or want more clarification. But I'm happy to, yes, thank you, Teresa. I'm happy to answer things for you here or later, but I also know that we are right on the 11 o'clock hour. So if you have to jet, do what you need to do. Patsy says, this is very helpful to direct students on giving peer feedback. I can use it now. Thanks. Well, you're welcome, Patsy. But absolutely, I think you can entirely present this to students on giving peer feedback because it's a framework that you can use in giving feedback. Sometimes people talk about the feedback sandwich of like, you're going to give one positive thing they did before you talk about the constructive criticism part, and then you're going to give another component, another positive feedback. And unfortunately, that's true and needed in society because folks will focus on the negative. It doesn't mean you're being disingenuous. It means you need to remind people of the things they did right. I read a study somewhere, and I don't really know how they actually calculated this, but for every negative thing we hear or every constructive piece of feedback we get, we need 4 positives to balance that out. Again, I don't know how that could be sort of like extrapolated and applied to life, but it reminds me that of the feedback sandwich. Yeah, when we need to give people guidance on how they give feedback, it's about making sure you highlight things that people did or things that they're doing well. Absolutely. Any other thoughts, comments? And if not, you are all welcome to head on out of here. Make sure you check out the badge action plan. Teresa posted that in the chat box, and that information, more information on that is also on the Center for Teaching Excellence website. But make sure you fill that out to get credit so you can get that cool badge and the action plan. And if there's nothing else, then make sure you have a fantastic Thursday. Go Eagles. Take care of yourselves. And I appreciate y'all for being here.